The Roman Empire is one of the most famous and influential states in all of world history, and its spectacular rise and disastrous fall continues to captivate us after more than 2,000 years. Rome's contributions to art, architecture, law, language, religion, and culture still surround us. At its height, the Roman Empire covered 2.3 million square miles over 3 continents, stretching north to Britannia and south deep into Egypt. It's hard to imagine that it all started with a single city. I'm archaeologist Darius Arya, and in this series, we'll discover the contributions of Rome, its incredible monuments, beautiful landscapes, strategic organization, and its provinces and their resources. We'll explore the founding of the city and its evolution from one capital to many, to truly appreciate Rome's impact on the rest of the empire. Our journey begins on the banks of the Tiber River. Let's travel the Roman Empire. A Syrian architect, a Greek sculptor, a North African mosaicist, a Spanish general. Citizens, foreigners, ex-slaves, they all left a legacy of know-how, art, architecture, beliefs, and traditions, exerting an influence on Rome that is perceptible even today. They came to Rome through an extensive network of roads, over 50,000 miles, spanning the 3 continents of empire. But as impressive as the road networks of the Romans were, it was Rome's connection to the Mediterranean Sea that ensured them an empire. And their umbilical cord to the Mediterranean? The Tiber River. Even living in Rome, sometimes you forget the Tiber River is here. And that's because you have the construction of massive flood walls at the end of the 19th century, forever changing our perception of the connection between ancient Rome and its lifeline to the Mediterranean, the Tiber River. Now, it's also in this area, so the story goes, that Romulus and Remus, as babies washed ashore, were suckled by a she-wolf and raised by local shepherds. And eventually, Romulus founded Rome on the nearby Palatine Hill, which becomes the residence of the senators of the Republic, and finally, the definitive residence of the Emperor of the Roman Empire. But what's critical in all of this story is the presence in the Tiber River of the Tiber Islands. Alongside the myths of Rome's ancient past, we also have the archaeological record that shows us that the early Romans were focused on controlling the crossing of the Tiber River. And the easiest place of crossing to control was where there was a sandbar that eventually became the Tiber Island, right here. And the Tiber Island also created a safe beachhead and allowed the formation of Rome's first river port. And it was guarded by the god of the port, Portunus. His temple still stands today. And nearby, in another sanctuary, you have the archaeological record showing us, alongside archaic temples, there are plenty of artifacts from the exchange between the Romans and the Etruscans, the Latins, and the Sabines. It was a place of early cultural exchange. The Tiber River was the essential conduit that connected Rome and all of its development to the rest of the Mediterranean. This is the lifeline to the Mediterranean. And you have on this side over here, Trastevere, the other side of the Tiber. But the real development took place over here, Centro Storico today. And of course, we have the Campus Martius area that frequently was flooded by the Tiber River that washed over. So you have this essential connection to the Mediterranean, but you're living with the realities of the dangers of the flooding. Now, initially you're drawing water from the Tiber River and from the natural springs in Rome, but finally you're getting aqueducts, bringing in copious amounts of water into the city, into the baths, into people's homes and public fountains, draining into the Tiber River. The same thing goes for the sewer line, like the Huaco Maxima. Everything's dumping into the Tiber River, even the discarded bodies of executed criminals. It wasn't a place where you wanted to swim. From the north, goods would arrive from various tributaries feeding into the Tiber along its 252-mile course, in particular lumber and travertine stone. But from the south, an endless supply of small 70-ton capacity boats towed by oxen or slaves along tow roads on the riverbanks against the current brought imported goods from all over the empire and beyond the empire, a sort of superhighway. Luxury items like silk from China, incense from Arabia, and pepper from India. Massive amounts of marble and granite, as well as key foodstuffs. Grain from North Africa, olive oil from Spain and North Africa, and wine. But how can we get a sense of this vast marketplace of Rome? Let's go shopping. What's so special about this is you're setting up each banco, each cart, in the morning before the crack of dawn, and then you break it down by lunchtime. And it's just a great rhythm and tradition that's been going on for really centuries. And there's nothing like Campo di Fiori in Rome. Buongiorno. It's nice coming into Campo di Fiori. You can get the fresh produce, what's in season. And right now, what's in season? Artichokes and puntarelle, which is a nice, crunchy chicory. It's really one of my favorite things. Through conquest and assimilation, enslaved and freed, plus foreigners attracted to the rich capital, a lot of cultures, beliefs, foods, and traditions arrived into Rome, creating complex relationships and melding of ideas. The Roman Forum was the initial marketplace of ancient Rome. It developed between the Palatine Hill and the Capitoline Hill, and this marshy land had to first be drained out. And it developed into the religious, political, and economic center of ancient Rome. It had key structures used by Romans. The basilicas, the courthouses. The Curia, the Senate House. Places for assembly and vote. And also so many temples. But eventually, it became too crowded. Julius Caesar, successful and wealthy from his conquest of Gaul, began to expand the Forum with his own adjacent space, which he called the Forum of Caesar. But it was Augustus and his end to a century of civil wars with his imposed Pax Romana that sealed the fate of the Republic. He too built a forum, the Forum of Augustus, in part to create a showcase center for Rome and in part to displace functions previously located on the Capitoline Hill and in the Forum, now directed on himself. The central feature of the Forum of Augustus is the Temple of Mars Ultor, that is Mars that avenges the death of Julius Caesar, the adoptive father of Augustus. Of course, there's more to this forum. It was lined with porticos. It's protected still today by an impressive firewall. And of course, all the walls were lined with colored marble, imported from all over the empire, the provinces conquered by Rome. And niches were filled with statuary, the who's who of Roman history. Augustus didn't stop with his forum. He completes many projects started by Julius Caesar, and then he adds many other ones with his associates, especially Agrippa. In the southern campus marshes, there was the Baths of Agrippa, the first Pantheon, and a new aqueduct. Further north, there was the Areopagus, the altar of Augustan peace, celebrating the Pax Romana. And still further north, there is the Mausoleum of Augustus, the great tomb of the emperor and his descendants. Rome was absolutely booming in the middle of the 2nd century BC, giving way to 100 years of internal strife and civil war fought by its greatest generals, Marius, Sulla, Pompey. And despite all of that fighting, they had great provincial acquisitions in Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Even more successful politically, Caesar adding Gaul and Augustus adding Illyricum and Egypt ended the last rounds of civic strife. Augustus was the city-wide innovator, dividing the city for the first time into 14 regions. Later, Nero had his own chance to rebuild after the devastating fire of 64. Other emperors like Vespasian and Trajan, with major conquests, followed their lead. As calamities still continued, floods, earthquakes, and fires, emperors responded by creating new bold buildings and spaces. But it was Augustus's initial reorganization of the city, then of the provinces, new forms of taxation, and a reorganization of the army, as well as his own role of emperor that set up successive dynasties to rule the provinces from a truly worthy capital. So much of ancient Rome lies hidden, buried beneath subsequent layers in the city. And so much of that ancient life was intimate, private, and mysterious. Wow. Now this is an incredible discovery made in the 1930s. What an impressive excavation. You can see all of these piers of concrete that are elevated above this archaeological site. Let's explore this Mithraeum. I'm walking here through a structure that was constructed in the 2nd century AD, a big public monument. We don't know exactly the nature of it, but on one side, there's a huge public staircase, and it's right next to the Circus Maximus. Now, in the 3rd century, this space underneath here was connected one to another to make a single hall for the worship of the Persian god Mithras. Now, this was a place that was for private worship. It's rather discreet. It's not hidden, but it's something that's still away from the public eye. And in fact, when we think about the Mithraeum temples throughout the Roman world, they're always in spaces like this, reused spaces, public halls, bath complexes, even private homes. You could worship any god in Rome. And the gods came from all over the empire, so international. Now, just across the way on the Palatine Hill, in the Patagogium, there were graffiti found depicting the worship of the Christian god. This one graffito shows that Christianity, as it became public, was subject to derision and eventual persecution. Here, Christ is depicted with an ass's head. So as you're moving from the private communities, the early worshipers of Christ, into a public discourse, there were inherent risks. Now, where did these Christians come from? They came from the Jewish community that was long before established. But if you didn't work well with the authorities or went against their wishes, you were punished. So there are many examples of groups being expelled: astrologers, philosophers, worshippers of the Egyptian gods, and Jews. So here you have this danger that's in the face of it when you're dealing with the city of Rome, when you're dealing with the emperor, and of course it doesn't always go your way. When we look at the history of the worshippers of Mithras, they threaded that needle, they stayed discreet, and they were not persecuted. We can't say the same thing about the early Christians of Rome. Today, the cars race around this valley, but in antiquity, it was the Circus Maximus, the greatest entertainment venue in the Roman world, holding 200,000 to 250,000 spectators that would witness chariot racing, that would witness hunts, venationes, and on some occasions, the triumphal parade celebrating a grand victory of the Roman people. The relationship of Rome as capital of empire and the masses living in the city center, we're talking about 1 million people crammed into 3,000 acres, was exemplified by the bread and circuses policy. And that is, you had a series of entertainments numbering up to 135 days of games and festivals. You also had monthly distribution of grain to all the citizens of Rome, and eventually even wine and pork. This was a big part of that relationship between the emperor, who's on the Palatine Hill, and down here in the greatest, largest venue of ancient Rome, the Circus Maximus. And this kind of relationship and discourse between these two grand monuments is later to be perpetuated in other capitals of the Roman Empire. Rome, despite its success, in a certain sense, is going to matter less and less. And that's because, in part, the emperor will be less and less present in the city of Rome. He's going to be leaving the city, fighting new hostilities, new emergencies. And that's despite the fact that Rome is always becoming more monumental and more grand. But the emperor has to be out there in the fringes of the empire to meet those new emergencies and new enemies of state. And that means you're going to have new Romes that are created, from Trier to Sirmium, from Milan to Nicomedia, and finally even Constantinople. You're also going to have, at many times, multiple emperors. You're going to have them working together. You're going to have them sometimes fighting against each other. And that citizenry is going to expand as well. First, the citizens of Rome only live in Rome. Then it spreads to Italy, and then all the provinces by 212 AD. And that means the perception of the city of Rome itself, capital city, is going to change. Over time, the idea of Rome is grander than even the capital city itself. From Rome, we travel to explore Rome's golden province, Spain. The Spanish Peninsula is beautiful, rugged, and expansive. Its various indigenous peoples, such as the Iberians, Celts, and Lusitani, among others, and their traditions developed in diverse regions. Along the Mediterranean and the Atlantic coasts, the northern Ebro Valley, Andalusia, and the massive central plateau called the Meseta, which became rich in wheat and livestock, and finally the northwest, Galicia and Asturias, hardest to tame. Several fertile river valleys running from mountain ranges to the Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts provide ample opportunity for agricultural and urban development. Spain always was an important crossroad, from North Africa, with particular attachment to neighboring Morocco, as well as a gateway to mainland Europe, and subject to frequent invasion. Celts first settled the land, followed by Greek and Phoenician colonists, founding cities and harbors, and they began to mine metals, displacing the indigenous Iberians. Carthage accelerated those efforts during the Punic Wars, and finally Rome arrived on the scene, and its 7 centuries of continual control and direction left an indelible mark, followed by Goths, Arabs, and Franks, so many layers of history. For their efforts in Spain, Rome created 2 provinces, Hispania Citerior and Ulterior, Spain nearer to and Spain farther from Rome. Throughout the Republic, fighting continued unabated, and some of Rome's greatest generals were involved, including Julius Caesar. It was under Augustus and committed campaigns that he finally ended all the fighting, and Spain was truly conquered. Between the period of 27 and 13 BCE, he was frequently in Spain, not just overseeing, but planning and organizing the provinces into a stable, prosperous zone. He reorganized Hispania Citerior into Hispania Tarraconensis, and he divided further Spain into Lusitania, roughly modern-day Portugal, and the fertile zone of today's Andalusia, into Hispania Baetica, creating several new colonies, mini-Romes, of Roman citizens, mainly soldiers. Augustus ushered in a new wave of prosperity that would enhance Spain's standing in the empire, with a massive output of resources, important cities whose citizens would exert a tremendous impact on Rome itself. Originating from the surrounding Sierra Morena Mountains, the Rio Tinto, the colored river. I mean, take a look at it. It is absolutely stunning. Now, its color is due to the geology of the area, but it's also due to 5,000 years of continual mining for copper, silver, and gold. So the Romans were working here 2,000 years ago, adding to that overall experience that deposited into the river as well, heavy metals and sulfides. And it gives you an otherworldly effect. Spanish silver allowed the Romans to finance their armies, countless wars and monuments. It was the silver, particularly around the area of Rio Tinto, that allowed the Romans to create the ultimate coin, the silver denarius, originally weighing 4 grams and worth 10 asses, the standard bronze coin. It became in antiquity the dollar of the ancient world. The extraction of silver was time-consuming and difficult. Pliny the Elder, who wrote about the eruption of Vesuvius, was here as procurator in Hispania in 73-74, and he remarks that the silver mines around Rio Tinto were the greatest of the empire. And he also remarks about one particular mine opened by Hannibal. It's called Bibelo, and it was still being mined by the Romans, yielding 300 pounds of silver a day. You can get a sense of what mining was like in the Roman era at the Rio Tinto Foundation's Mining Museum. Being inside this reconstruction here, you get a sense of just how tight the spaces were for mining in the ancient world. And in this case here, the shafts would go up to 1 mile into the mountain and as deep as 450 feet. So they're going below the water table. So Pliny the Elder, who was here witnessing it, told us they employed water wheels, some of which were found in excavations, as far deep as 8 levels. And each water wheel wasn't small. They were 15 feet height apiece. So you have the use of water wheels and Archimedes screws to pull out 24/7 water that would allow then the miners to go beneath the water table to continue to follow the precious veins of silver. It really was an amazingly difficult process, but it's all in the service of the state The people doing that hard labor are slaves. The people who are doing that work are children as well. So it really was an awful experience thinking that you're underground, mining with your picks by lamplight, all in the service of the Roman state. The Roman city of Merida became capital of the province of Hispania Lusitania, a veritable miniature Rome in all of its components. Colonia Augusta Immerita was named after its founder and reflected the emeritus status of its first citizens, retired soldiers, namely from the 5th Aludi and the 10th Gemina legions. It was founded in 25 BCE after Augustus' successful Cantabrian wars in Spain at an important logistical juncture of newly constructed road systems underlined by its massive bridge over the Guadiana River. This was a huge statement. And extending 60 arches over half a mile in the middle, centered on a small island in the river, this is the longest preserved bridge in the ancient Roman Empire. It was and still is a testament to Roman engineering prowess. Now, when was it constructed? Some scholars point to the 2nd century CE, but it makes more sense it was made in the time of Augustus when the city was first founded. It's had a storied life. It was heavily damaged in the 5th century, and again, after flood damage in 1603. Still, it remains as an important gateway and entry into this amazing Augustan city.
Every city that Rome built was laid out like a mini-Rome, with an orthogonal street plan focused on a central piazza or forum space.
Although so much of the Forum is today hidden away beneath streets and modern buildings, there are still portions that are tantalizing and give us a sense of just how magnificent it was. Like this space right here. This is the Forum Iectum, the adjacent Forum, and it really emulates contemporary buildings in Augustan Rome. It's truly a celebration of Rome, and in particular Augustus. Here we can see architectural and sculptural features that are directly related to the building program in Rome, and in particular the Forum of Augustus. So the portico here actually has shields representing also Jupiter on them, alternating with caryatid figures. Those two features are found exactly in the Forum of Augustus. The Forum of Augustus also had a Hall of Fame and the who's who of Roman history. And this space also has statues in niches, each one with an elogium, so a marble plaque detailing who they were and how they contributed to Roman history, again imitated directly from the Forum of Augustus. Just down the street is the so-called Temple of Diana, but in reality, this structure in the Forum was probably a temple dedicated to the worship of the emperors, starting with Augustus while he was still alive. Worshipping Augustus as a god in Rome was forbidden, but in the provinces, that was another matter, and it is so wonderfully preserved. Made of local granite, it stood undisturbed until it was incorporated into a 16th century noble house. Now liberated, it is one of the best preserved temples in Roman Spain. This is such a sprawling city, and in this portion on the east, you have this magnificent theater. It's considered to be the best preserved theater in Western Europe. And look at this impressive Scène France. You've never seen anything like it. All of this marble, the statuary, the marble veneer. Now that's very rare. Usually, after the Romans, after antiquity, that's the kind of material that gets recycled. It gets burned down for lime. But in this case here, we have a faithful restoration up to 2 stories of the stage set, the Scène France, due to the miracle of this amount of material preserved. Now, the theater was made by Agrippa, dating to 16 BCE. The Scène France we attribute to the 2nd century CE, and we even have restorations as late as the time of Constantine. So this theater enjoyed a long life, many centuries of use, and even today, it's a place that can be used by spectators to enjoy that history. Another stunning characteristic of Mérida is the exceptional quality of the preservation of its water and wastewater systems. 3 aqueducts with 2 dams still intact. In the city itself, well-preserved underground sewer lines underline the care and construction involved. In Mérida, financed and guided by Augustus and Agrippa, who were contemporarily upgrading Rome, including the sewer lines like the Cloaca Maxima, meant that the city was a showcase center effectively standing in for the grandeur of Rome. Such masterful urbanization ensured that these new cities did indeed flourish as new centers of trade, commerce, and socialization. In Spain, and perhaps the entire Roman Empire, no single aqueduct line stands out quite like the Segovia Aqueduct, known for its beauty and grace and longevity of use. The source of the aqueduct is 10 miles away, the Rio Frio. And the channel is right here, coming into the city. The water comes into this section here, this big empty space, and it's an opportunity, Vitruvius tells us, to decant the impurities that are in the water. And you have this option here, then of blocking that main channel, you have the chance then to move the water with the impurities out in the secondary channel, not going into the city. A really simple but ingenious construction that makes the aqueducts really something special. And everyone's here for this spectacle of history. The bridge is half a mile long. It's got a full height of 93 feet. It's composed of 20,000 tons of granite held together without concrete. But more than the size and the expanse, it's the elegance and the perfection of the arcades of 2 tiers that still captures our imagination today. We can ask who ordered it. Now, the scholarship tends to focus on Augustus, but a new recent interpretation has suggested that it's actually Trajan. We can look halfway up the aqueduct bridge. There's a rectangular area filled with holes that would have once held clamps for bronze lettering. So although we don't know who actually dedicated it, we do have 2 niches, one on either side, that held protective deities. And one is documented as being Hercules, the patron god of the city. Today, in the Christian era, they've been replaced by Saint Sebastian and the Virgin Mary. 35 of the arches were destroyed by the Moors in 1071, then rebuilt after the city was recaptured, back into action in 1483. It continued to flow until modern pipes were installed in 1929. But think of the history used by Romans, Visigoths, Arabs, Castilians. Frontinus, who wrote the definitive book of the Aqueducts of Rome, stated that the aqueducts were a solemn testimony of the Roman Empire. Nowhere was this clearer than at the Aqueduct of Segovia. Just come down this ancient ventilation shaft, 60 feet cut right through the rock into this particular lapis specularis mine. This was rediscovered in the 1950s. Today it's known as Mora Encantada and allows us the opportunity to explore the process of mining lapis specularis. Miners were looking for this incredible material, the lapis specularis, which is gypsum or selenite. And the thing is, Pliny the Elder tells us, it exists throughout the empire. It's mined from Cappadocia in Turkey to Cyprus, even Sicily. But the quality in Spain, Pliny the Elder tells us, the quality near Segovia was exceptional because the size of the material that could be extracted was so large, and the quality, the translucence of this material was phenomenal. Large, massive crystals, and you could extract it and literally saw it into panels. So it was a stand-in for window pane glass. And there's some incredible examples of its use. We find this in Pompeii. We find it in people's houses of the wealthy, in the bath complexes. The Emperor Tiberius used it to create a greenhouse for having certain vegetables all year long on the island of Capri. We're even told its shavings were used and dispersed on the track of the Circus Maximus to make it shine and glimmer. So it was really famous and famously extracted around here for 3 centuries, from Augustus into the 2nd and even 3rd centuries CE.
From Rome, the empire expanded around the Mediterranean as far west as Morocco, whose Roman remains are visible still today. The land of Morocco is a land of stark contrasts, with varied topography and climate over 275,000 square miles. It's one of the only 3 countries that faces both the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean, with a massive mountain range. The Atlas Mountains, with its highest peak over 13,000 feet above sea level, run through the country, from the southwest to the northeast, trapping moisture to create regions of rich agricultural lands. It's also a land of harsh terrain, with beautiful vast deserts connected to sub-Saharan lands via important historic trade routes. Moroccans call Morocco Maghreb el-Akassa, Kingdom of the West, which was born from ancient Mauritania, the kingdom of the indigenous people, the Maori, whose various tribes began to unite after the creation of Punic outposts such as Tingis and Lixus on the Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts. Where the Phoenicians originally settled is where the main population still resides, and from the interaction through trade and dominant Punic city Carthage, the indigenous Berber tribes organized their own kingdom, the sprawling Mauritania, extending to Algeria, which eventually fell under the power of Rome by 146 BC. First as a client kingdom, then as a Roman province. After the passing of Roman influence and the flourishing of Christian communities, the Arab conquest in the 7th century further transformed the land of the Berbers. Though throughout its history, Morocco has remained tethered both to Europe, in particular neighboring Spain, as well as sub-Saharan culture, to be European, Berber, Arab. It's always been multicultural in its DNA, constituting a crossroad of European, North African, and sub-Saharan cultures from antiquity until today. There's Volubilis, on a ridge between 2 wadis, Fertassa and Kumane, overlooking a fertile plain that yielded olive groves and other agriculture. Volubilis. The name was probably derived from the Berber term hualili, oleander. Here, the terrain looks much like it did 2,000 years ago, rich with olive trees and grain, and in ancient Roman times was a territory that also supplied wild animals for the games in Rome, here on the edge of empire. The Maori, or the Moors, of the Mauritania Kingdom first fought in the service of Carthage. They created their own urban centers, like Volubilis, as early as the 3rd century BCE. Then, with the rise of Rome and its conquest of Carthage by 146 BCE, Mauritania overcame social and political unrest, eventually forming a long-term alliance with Rome. In 25 BC, Mauritania becomes a client kingdom of Rome. And the king is Juba II. And he's really interesting because he was already sent to Rome as a hostage. And he grew up with Augustus. And when he's sent back to Mauritania, his wife is none other than Cleopatra Selina II, the daughter of Mark Antony and Cleopatra.
Yes, that Cleopatra. And together, they revolutionized the kingdom. Juba is a real Renaissance man, and you have flourishing cultural developments. And Volubilis, a city of 30 acres, is growing, and it becomes an important administrative center of the Kingdom of Mauritania. But things were destined to change. The Emperor Caligula called the King Ptolemy to Rome and had him killed, making Mauritania now a new province of Rome. But afterwards, there's a revolt, and a certain Idamon leads that revolt, and it lasts for a number of years. But at the conclusion, the Emperor Claudius determines that he wants to divide Mauritania into two distinct provinces, Mauritania Tingitana, named after the major city, and Mauritania Caesariensis. Now, under the Romans, Volubilis flourished. It expanded, and they're going to build out the city on a new orientation, on a new grid, different from the original city. So much of the original city is going to disappear underneath new public spaces. But the Sanctuary of Baal lives on. We have here the Capitolium Sanctuary, which you'll find in any Roman city. But let's keep in mind that the local population, the core, it's always the locals here of the Maghreb. But under the Romans, Volubilis becomes really international. And we have inscriptions that detail the presence of Spaniards, Gauls, Germans, Britons. We've got Syrians, Arabs, and Jews. So here Volubilis is becoming an international hub, a great city representative of the Roman Empire. But by 285, it was all over. Volubilis was definitively abandoned by the Romans. And that was not just this city, but a huge portion of Mauritania. Local tribes threatened, organized, and ultimately took these lands. And the Romans never tried to get that land back this far south, preferring to remain along the Mediterranean. Now, Diocletian tries to reorganize the province, but he doesn't go down south to reconquer. He just stays along the Mediterranean. It doesn't mean, though, that Volubilis was abandoned, because the Berbers, the local population, was always here, and Volubilis continued to thrive for centuries. And then you're going to have a Byzantine church presence of Christians. You're going to have then the Arabs sweep through in the 7th century throughout the Maghreb, including here. And finally, Idris I. He's going to found his dynasty, the Idrisid dynasty, and he is the founder of the modern Moroccan state. So much is happening here in Volubilis after the Romans, and the prominent remains of that dynasty are visible outside the city walls.
Idris' city fell, but his kingdom still thrives in modern Morocco. Today, if we want to capture the vibrant culture, craftsmanship, creativity, and resilience of Volubilis, we can search out what the traditions of artisans and creators are still a part of Moroccan life. Let's explore Morocco's modern urban landscape. Emir Abu Bakr ibn Umar, the Berber ruler whose empire ultimately stretched down the Sahara, over to Algeria and into Spain, founded Marrakesh in 1062 as the capital of the Almoravid kingdom.
The word Marrakesh is derived from the Berber, meaning land of God or children of Cush. And the term Marrakesh is actually applied to the entire country of Morocco into the 20th century. Now, the city layout and the wall circuit, it's all happening in the beginning of the 12th century. And underneath is a whole underground water system of qanats, which they call here locally Qattara. And we take a look at this wall circuit here. It was 11 miles long. That's getting close to the length of the Aurelianic wall circuit in ancient Rome. And they used the local red sandstone that then is applied as a nickname to the city of Marrakesh, the Red City, the Ochre City. with heavy Andalusian architectural influences. And with the Atlas Mountains in the backdrop and the Tensift River passing nearby, Marrakesh developed into a hub, a center, religiously, culturally, and economically for the Maghreb and sub-Saharan Africa. When Marrakesh finally fell to the Alawites in 1668, it's still the ruling dynasty of Morocco. They introduced a series of tombs, 7 tombs of saints of Sufism located throughout the city, and this is one of them. And they, at the same time, moved the capital of Morocco from Marrakesh to Fez, Meknes, and finally Rabat. But the city's charms, colors, and creative energies have continued to endear it to visitors worldwide in search of ancient experiences that are still contemporary. And we can take those experiences and apply them to the cities that we travel throughout the Roman Empire. The markets of modern Marrakesh are as vibrant as the ancient markets in the Roman Empire. The sights, sounds, and smells of the souks in the Medina fill your senses. In the souk Adadin, you'll find metalworking. In the souk Kamakin, stringed instruments. In the souk Kouari, basketry and wood turning. Souks Marine, clothing. Souk Smata, slippers and belts. Souk Sinagin, jewelry. Souk Sarbia, carpets. There's even an area remembered as the former slave market. Although so much of Morocco's Roman past has disappeared, it's through cities like Marrakesh, with its rich artistic history and extensive trade, that we are able to reclaim a sense of that once vibrant Roman culture. We're so lucky today that we still have impressive villages preserved, like the well-fortified Ben Ait Hadu, due to the constant conservation and restoration work necessary to preserve its fragile earthen architecture. The success of the Roman Empire always boiled down to local negotiations and local relationships. And we've seen in Morocco, the ancient Mauritania and local Berber tribes carved out their own space within that ancient Roman framework. But ultimately, the Roman cities disappeared, and they were paved over, rebuilt, and stripped away. And new dynasties, Islamic dynasties, forged new paths, new futures, new cities, and they have a rich cultural heritage and religious legacy. Centers like Marrakesh preserve ancient traditions and connect us to the multicultural legacy of ancient Rome here at the edge of empire.